I grew up in a working class family with a father who worked in a factory my whole life. Most of those years he worked second shift, which was absolutely fantastic in the summertime. We were able to go to the school lot and play some version of baseball several times a week. It was just our normal routine. It was a pickup game if enough other kids showed up and were available, or we would use ghost runners if we were short, and if only a few of us were there, we'd still play fly knocker or hot box. It was just a wonderful way to spend the summer. Other days, we would be out in the community, maybe mowing grass together for folks who couldn't manage their lawns or picking up groceries. And during the school year, it was a different story. I mainly saw my dad on the weekends, except for those nights I managed to stay up late and we'd catch the late news or reruns of MASH. In our home, there was never, ever a question of the dignity and importance of manual labor. My dad had considered other careers, but the factory had better pay and benefits than the options available to him after he finished university, so he stayed at the factory. I grew up understanding that his work wasn't less important than the work he might have done if he had chosen a different career path. There was also never a question about the importance of labor rights and union organizing. Even though my dad worked at a non-union factory, he always emphasized that the benefits he enjoyed were also because of the power of unions. At the heart of all this were some very basic principles. I couldn't put them into words as a child, of course, but I could give you a short list now. 1, a healthy economy cannot be separated from equity and equality. 2, everyone should have access to safe, stable, and healthy economic and social lives. 3, discrimination and disparities are signs of social sickness. 4, the rights of workers to organize and collectively bargain should always be protected and prioritized. And 5, all work and all workers should be treated with dignity and gratitude. But life is complicated. Although these were the ideals growing in my heart, it didn't take long to begin to feel the contrast between these values and the reality of how people were treated in the workplace. I learned that lesson personally soon enough. As a teen, I spent a few years in the food service industry, working at McDonald's. And as a young adult, my years as a student and then as a bivocational pastor meant that I often made a living by whatever means were available. As a graduate TA, a construction worker, a roofer, a seasonal laborer in hayfields or vineyards, a private music instructor, and as an educator in a Title I program. I also spent a decade as an unpaid caregiver and stay-at-home parent. These were mainly fields and jobs that didn't enjoy the protection or the benefits of a labor union. These experiences, combined with studying labor history, gradually gave me a better understanding of how the values and convictions I learned as a child did and did not translate into the economic world around me. The biggest gap, of course, was the decline in union membership over the last 70 years. My father grew up at the tail end of the peak of the labor movement's power, while I grew up as neoliberalism gained a bigger and bigger influence on the world around us, and labor power was in decline. When my dad turned 18 years old, more than 25% of Missouri workers were unionized. When I turned 18 years old, that number had already slipped to less than 15%. And when my own child turned 18 years old, it was under 10%. And that's consistent with the overall trend in the United States. As Reed Wilson reported in The Hill last January, union memberships bottomed out at 10.3% in 2019. And that's the lowest rate since 1983 when the Bureau of Labor started recording worker union rates. Wilson puts this decline into sharp focus with a simple comparison. In 1983, 17.7 million Americans belonged to a union, and 20.5 million were represented by unions. In 2022, there are about 50 million more workers in the American economy than in 1983, and 3 million fewer union members. There was a small exception to that trend that Wilson noted, a slight bump in 2020. union rates increased a small amount to 10.8%, but it wasn't because more people were joining unions. It was because more non-union workers lost their jobs at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. And that result intersects with racial disparities. In a report from the Economic Policy Institute, the EPI, in 2020, the authors demonstrated that, quote, the decline of unionization has played a significant role in the expansion of black-white wage gaps over the last 4 decades, which, of course, left marginalized communities more vulnerable to unemployment during the pandemic. You can see it in the statistics. While unemployment for white workers peaked at 12.8% during the pandemic, it was 15% for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, 16.7% for black workers, and 18.5% for Hispanic workers. Black and Hispanic workers were also much less likely to work from home and much more likely to have jobs that didn't provide a safe workplace with access to personal protective equipment, for example, or paid sick leave. As the authors pointed out, quote, the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic have been felt broadly, but not equally. And although unionizing would be a major step in alleviating both economic and racial injustices, the system, including current labor laws, has increasingly made it difficult to do anything about it, to organize, to make a change. And that is by design. Business owners, corporate leaders, and employers have historically opposed unions, especially in the United States. And the most obvious reason is the most commonly noted one. Union members get paid more in wages and in benefits, and that's viewed as a threat to the profits of the already rich and powerful. Significantly, union members are still more likely to earn a higher wage than non-union workers, despite all the pressure against them. The most recent data shows that a union worker earns about $1,169 a week compared to $975 a week earned by non-union workers. That adds up to more than $10,000 over a year's earnings. Not surprisingly, decreased union membership has also been met with increased income inequality. As the EPI documented, from 1979 to 2019, wages for the top 1% grew about 160%, and wages for the bottom 90% grew only 26%. But this isn't the whole story. Eileen DeVault, a labor historian and professor at Cornell University, has pointed out that this gap is about more than money. She says unions aren't just about higher wages. They are very much about workers having a say about what happens in the workplace, and that's what employers don't like. The numbers support that point. According to the EPI, quote, we know that unions promote economic equality and build worker power, helping workers to win increases in pay, better benefits, and safer working conditions. But that's not all unions do. Unions also have powerful effects on workers' lives outside of work. In the same way unions give workers a voice at work with a direct impact on wages and working conditions, the data suggests that unions also give workers a voice in shaping their communities. Where workers have this power, states have more equitable economic structures, social structures, and democracies. This helps explain why those controlling most industries have found a way to limit or stifle the power of working class people. As a result, unionization has been uneven across industries, political values, and geographies. First, public sector workers are 5 times more likely to belong to a union. A third of government workers are union members compared to just 6% of private sector employees. So you're less likely to have access to a union if you work in the private sector. Second, workplaces in blue states have more union members. For example, 17 to 20% of laborers belong to unions in places like Hawaii, New York, Rhode Island, and Washington. The numbers drop to less than 5% in Arkansas, Georgia, North Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, and Virginia. But even those states outpace South Carolina, where only 2.9% of workers are unionized. So you're less likely to have access to a union if you live in a red state. And third, certain industries are more likely to be unionized. In 2018, workers in utilities, transportations, and telecommunications, for example, all had union memberships of at least 15%. But only 1.3% of food service workers belong to a union. And that backdrop helps us understand why recent union victories are so important. The medical industry, for example, has been under tremendous strain during the pandemic, and workers have obviously and terribly suffered. In response to those dangerous working conditions during the pandemic, many hospital workers began to organize and join unions. And a recent study showed that unionized nursing homes significantly lowered mortality and infection rates during the pandemic. As a CNA named Rosalind Roz Reagans explained, it's pretty simple. The safer we are, the safer they are. And with a union, you have more personal protective equipment, you can get a day off if you're sick, you get more COVID pay, you can negotiate with your supervisor face-to-face to make things work. All of that helps residents too, because we're not infecting them as much if we have better standards for ourselves. Even doctors who traditionally have not belonged to unions have had to consider their options. This has been the case for emergency room doctors at the Valley Medical Center in San Jose, California. They've been working together with members of the Registered Nurses Professional Association to organize themselves, with a goal of highlighting and addressing problems and abuses when their emergency room was acquired by a private equity-backed physician staffing monolith called U.S. Acute Care Solutions. But the most notable cases in our headlines have been workers at Amazon.com and their warehouses and workers at Starbucks. In the latter case, we've seen 10 Starbucks locations vote to join Starbucks Workers United, with 170 more stores petitioning for elections. Writing for Vox, Ronnie Mola reported on their goals, which align with the EPI's conclusion that strong unions are associated with more equitable economic structures, social structures, and democracies. Mola wrote that the Starbucks organizers are, quote, hoping to use collective bargaining to get a number of improvements, including higher pay, more hours, and better safety protections, a more necessary change since the erstwhile latte makers became frontline workers during the pandemic. They want more say in what their working lives are like, and they want to hold a company that talks of progressive values accountable. Mercado, a graduate student who also works at Starbucks, told Mola that we've been forced into this world where we can't afford anything, where we can't afford to live. It's not a difference between generations. It's just a difference between what you've been given and the tools that we can use to make the change. And Fagan, a 22-year-old shift supervisor, said, Starbucks is quote-unquote progressive, woke, whatever. They give us decent benefits, but we're literally selling our lives and time and bodies to this corporation. Tell me why I don't deserve a living wage. Similarly, the importance of the success of organizers in Staten Island in unionizing with the Amazon Labor Union, the ALU, cannot be overstated, especially since their work was done in the face of aggressive and powerful anti-union campaigns. They did this through a combination of persistence, hard work, and creativity. Luis Felix Leon, reporting for In These Times, pointed out that the ALU upended conventional wisdom of how to run a union campaign, relying less on the staid world of establishment unionism and more on the spectacle, quote, of fearless working-class black leadership from below. Gerald Bryson, a co-founder of the ALU, had previously been fired by Amazon for protesting pandemic working conditions. He put it this way, "You really want to know how we did it? I'll tell you right now how we did it. We didn't go out and get expert. We went out and found crazy MFers just like us that ain't scared of nothing." Taken together, these kinds of successes may indicate a shift to what Brooks, a News Guild field director, calls momentum organizing. In his words, workers are in terrible conditions all over the country, And when they see a public example of a group of people in a similar situation taking action to better their situation, it encourages them to do the same. So what was once a risky long shot action by a small group of workers snowballs into a series of successes. And part of this snowballing connects with the anger, grief, and frustration of working people who sacrificed their well-being to survive a pandemic, while CEOs and shareholders cashed in on their sacrifice. We can all contribute to the process of creating and sustaining a movement for true change in the direction of economic and social justice. At the base is nurturing an attitude that centers and respects working class and poor people, rather than demonizing them. As I've said before, community, sustaining human lives requires work, and a lot of that work is manual labor. Working people, paid and unpaid, are essential, and our labor is beautiful. All labor should be treated with dignity and respect. For those of us who want to educate ourselves more about a way forward, I'd recommend at least 3 paths. First, study labor history. You can read books, see a film, enjoy art, sing songs, or watch YouTube videos. And in a manuscript for this talk, I have links to options for all of those. Second, get a working knowledge of policies that support working class well-being. A good place to start might be the policy agenda at the Economic Policy Institute and the Economic Justice Platform at the Movement for Black Lives. And third, find an organization where you can get involved. It might be through donating, it might be through volunteering, it might be through attending meetings, whatever fits, whatever works for you. Join or organize a union if that's possible in your employment. If it's not an option, explore other groups, such as Jobs with Justice or the Poor People's Campaign. Connecting with others, our shared history, our shared values, and our shared work is at the heart of working class solidarity and unionization. Together, we can choose to mark this May Day as another turning point toward a better, more beautiful, and more just world. Happy May Day.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.